Amendment number A, 4499.
On the amendment, Senator Argyle.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, we owe the taxpayers of Pennsylvania a sincere apology.
Mr. President, may we be at ease for just one moment, please?
Senator Costa requests that the Senate be at ease momentarily. Without objection, Senate will be at ease.
Why do we owe this apology to our taxpayers? Because since 1834, we have forced our schools to rely on an outmoded, archaic, and unfair property tax. This is the day, think about it, for the first time in the history of the Senate of Pennsylvania, we can eliminate this hated tax. Some of you are going to be familiar with this from either the Byrds in 1965 or the oldest song lyrics from King Solomon in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. Take your pick, King Solomon or the Byrds. Today is the day, and it's long overdue. Think about how much has changed since 1834. Automobiles, indoor plumbing, electric service in the house. This dates all the way back to Governor George Wolfe and Andrew Jackson. Now, maybe this was the best that our predecessors could come up with in the 1830s, but certainly today, we can do better when it comes to educating our children than sending in the assessor and saying, how old is your house? How big is your house? Did you remember to fix that hole in your roof? When was it last assessed? When was it last spot assessed? There has to be a better way to fund our public schools. We've had so many missed opportunities. In 1951, my mom and my dad were in high school. This General Assembly and Governor Fine enacted a 1% sales tax for the first time for education, but they missed the chance to get rid of this unfair tax. In the 1970s, Governor Schaap and the House and the Senate once again tried to address this unfair property tax. They enacted our first income tax, they enacted the Pennsylvania lottery, they enacted the property tax and rent rebate, so we helped some people a little bit, but we were still stuck with this unfair tax. More modern governors, more modern General Assemblies enacted the Act 1 limits on school district taxes, casino gaming. Again and again and again we've tried, but we have not succeeded. Senator Schwenk and I last week were with 500 people in her district in Berks County. We heard one of the lead grassroots activists, Ron Boltz, explain to those 500 people, you can't reform this tax, you can't tweak it, you have to eliminate it. We've tried so many things in education. Some of them have actually worked. My father there was a time when he could smoke in the school library. That's not allowed anymore. Wish we would have gotten rid of it sooner. Maybe he'd still be with us. My grandfather, Argel, in the 1920s, taught in a one-room schoolhouse in Schuylkill County after he graduated from the Kutztown Normal School. They paid him partially in vegetables. We don't do that anymore, but we're still stuck with this same stupid, unfair tax. But maybe you don't believe the birds, maybe you don't believe King Solomon, that's today's the day. Let me explain in the words of two modern Pennsylvania political scientists, Terry Madonna and Mike Young, one of my former colleagues at Penn State, Professor Madonna, of course, down at F&M. He wrote this on March 23rd, 2015, RIP the school property tax. Why not 100% elimination? Why settle for half a loaf? Why not get rid of the property tax for school funding altogether? Is it a radical idea, an extreme idea, an unrealistic idea? Actually, no. The professors continued. Pennsylvania's property tax, like property taxes in many other states, is a fossilized artifact from the 19th century that faltered badly in the 20th century and failed spectacularly into the 21st century. Why? It's unfair, in their words. It's regressive. It unfailingly falls on seniors and others with fixed income and less means to pay for it. Does anyone know that? They also noted that it's costly. The property tax is enormously expensive for government to collect. It's inefficient. It's inelastic. They explain that's economists speak for a tax that fails to raise enough revenue to pay the bills. It's complex. In their terms, it's Byzantine and baffling to taxpayers. A few years after my parents had retired, Dad got a notice from the mailbox and called me up right away. His former employer, the school district, had decided that he needed to pay more property taxes than all of his neighbors because he had bought that house, that smaller house, so he didn't have to take the steps anymore, or he didn't have to rake the leaves. They didn't assess the whole neighborhood, they just assessed him. That's how unfair this tax can be. Again, back to Professor Madonna and Professor Young. Among all the major taxes Americans pay, including income and sales taxes, property taxes are the worst by any measure used. Taxpayers loathe them, politicians deplore them, economists condemn them. This sad state of affairs, in their words, has gone on too long. Administration after administration, going back to Robert Casey and earlier, have tried somehow to reform the property tax to make it fairer and more efficient. All of those efforts have failed badly. Now, in the 21st century, talking about reforming the 19th century property tax, in their words, is really just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic long after the iceberg has been hit. The property tax cannot be reformed, they note, but it can be abolished. Their conclusion: both sides really want the same thing here, a sane tax system in support of a stable revenue source for schools. Getting rid of the property tax means, in their words, the governor wins, the Republicans win, the Democrats win, and most important of all, the long-suffering taxpayers of Pennsylvania's win. Again, in their words, it doesn't get any better than that. That's why we need a yes vote on this amendment. It's been drafted and supported by more than 80 local taxpayer groups. I'm asking for your support on their behalf. Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair thanks the gentleman, Senator Argel. Further on the amendment, Senator Fulmer.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise in strong support of Senator Argel's amendment to House Bill 683. If your districts are like mine, people say school property taxes are their biggest headache, and they want total elimination of these taxes to be a top priority of our General Assembly. However, reaching this much-needed and long overdue goal has proven to be elusive because of what it takes to eliminate these onerous and ever-growing taxes. Total elimination of school property taxes requires nearly $13 billion. That's right, $13 billion in replacement revenues. And there are four other taxes that can be used as replacement revenues to eliminate the school property taxes. We could use personal income tax, we could use earned income tax, we could use sales and use tax, or some new tax. To eliminate school property taxes, the Argo Amendment proposes to incorporate the provisions of Senate Bill 76 and House Bill 683, namely a combination of changes in the sales tax and changes to the personal income tax. The sales tax would be broadened and expanded to a 7%, and PIT would be increased to from 3.07% to 4.95%. Using the sales tax to replace school property taxes works because people have some control over paying these consumption tax. More people pay the sales tax than those who pay property taxes, so we're expanding the base. The sales tax is paid with each purchase, while property taxes are big bills. Like any state tax policy, shifting from one tax to another will result in different impacts on different taxpayers. To calculate how the changes proposed by Argo's amendment would impact you, compare what you now pay in school property taxes to what you need to spend under an expanded sales tax and higher PIT. Increasing the sales tax to 7% and expanding its base would mean you would need to spend $14,285.71 in newly taxable items for each $1,000 you now pay in property taxes before you are a net loser. Opponents of this plan have two main objections to its original draft. They said the numbers didn't work and the bill is technically flawed. I have been honored to have worked with Senator Argo to address both of these issues and correct them. Changes to this plan were drafted through an arduous process of meeting with opponents, carefully going through their concerns, studying the 2013 Independent Fiscal Office analysis of the plan, and dissecting 13 pages of comments from the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue on the bill as originally drafted. This process resulted in an amendment that is before us today. More importantly, the Argo Amendment addresses all the excuses for not supporting total elimination of school property taxes. The numbers work. It is possible to reach the goal of eliminating school property tax. Mr. President, the Argo Amendment to HB 683 allows us to reach a much-needed and long overdue goal of eliminating school property taxes. If you support the Argo Amendment to 683, House Bill 683, you support the total elimination of school property taxes. If you don't, you agree that maybe the status quo is working. Mr. President, I urge a yes vote on Senator Argo's amendment to House Bill 683, and if you would just bear with me on one point is this. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a start of something that maybe we should be looking at in the future as we continue this long process. But let me read you something from Article 1, Section 1 of our state constitution. Article 1, Section 1 is basically our Bill of Rights. Article 1, Section 1 states that all men are born equally free and independent and have certain inherent and indefeasible rights, among which are those of enjoying and defending life and liberty, of acquiring, possessing, and protecting property and reputation, and of pursuing their own happiness. My question I ask is this: how is one able to acquire, possess, and protect one's property if, for no fault of your own, you cannot afford those very onerous school property taxes? This is a beginning, this is not the end, and I ask for a positive vote on Senate Bill, on the amendment to HB 683. Thank you very much.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Further on the amendment, Senator Schwank.
Thank you, Mr. President. Forgive me for a moment if I have to catch my breath. This is a moment that many of us, and certainly I, have been waiting for a very, very long time. School property tax elimination. As I've said many times, both on this floor as well as in our caucus, Mr. President, this is the issue that I hear about everywhere I go in my district. When I'm at the farmer's market, when I'm at the doctor's office, at the mall, and even, of course, in my office, I hear from so many individuals about the problem of paying their school property taxes. In particular, Mr. President, the elderly taxpayers are the ones that truly tug at my heart, although I understand that this will be a benefit to many, many, many people. For those individuals who oftentimes come in my office, the widows and the widowers who truly They ask to go behind closed doors because for them it's a matter of pride. Many years they've been paying these taxes faithfully. Certainly they had children in school and they wanted to be sure to support education. It's not that they don't care about that. The fact is, however, that their incomes are stagnant. They're not seeing increases in their, if they have a pension, they're not seeing increases in that, of course. Social Security is not enough to totally live on and continue to pay school property taxes, at least in the district that I live in, Mr. President. These are proud citizens who have lived all their lives in their homes, raised their families, and played by the rules. But the rules don't work for them anymore. They don't work for young families who are trying to buy a home and find that school property taxes price them out of the market. As a prime sponsor on Senate Bill 76, I am in support of this amendment, and I would like to thank Senator Argyle for working with a bipartisan group of senators to address this issue and to try to come to some resolution. This is the only opportunity we've had to address this matter in the Senate in recent memory. It truly is a historic moment, and it's one that I think all of us have to consider, that occasionally we got to think differently. We've got to understand that change must come to Pennsylvania. This is the time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair thanks the gentlelady from Berks. Further on the amendment, the gentleman from Lancaster, Senator Smucker.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to thank the sponsor of the bill and others who've been supporting the senator from Lebanon County for the work they've done on this very important issue for residents of the district that I represent. In fact, I think it's fair to say this is the top issue that any legislator in Lancaster County hears about on a regular basis. I know in the 7 years I've been here, 8 years counting my first campaign for this office, it certainly has been the most important issue that has been brought up to me consistently in whether it be public forums or private conversations. And I know that many of us have promised to give any responsible bill a fair consideration. And today, we have the chance to do just that. I think the vote today comes at a critical time for this issue, and I think it also has potential to completely change the momentum around the issue. The Senate has always been the high hurdle in the legislative process surrounding the issue of property tax elimination. So if we pass this bill today, I think finally the momentum shifts to the taxpayer advocates. They will no longer have to negotiate among themselves to make changes to a bill that never seems to be quite good enough. The burden would then fall on opponents who, faced with the prospect of this bill becoming law, will have to try to negotiate changes to make it more workable. There's very good reason for action right now, tonight, on this floor. Through their persistent and persuasive advocacy, taxpayers have earned their shot at this measure. They deserve to see our votes on the record this evening. I will be the first to admit that despite all the work that's been done on this bill, it's far from perfect. And I say that as an acknowledgement, not as a criticism. Because whenever we talk about changes to property taxes, whether it's elimination, as this bill would do, or reduction, as per other proposals that we've been talking about over the past few weeks, we know there are problems and there are very difficult issues that arise. It shifts the tax burden around, thus creating winners and losers. We also know that the real answer and the only way any of these plans work is for true cost constraint down the road. But among all these plans, only elimination cures one overriding fear, and that is that property taxes will just simply rise again. And we certainly have seen the controversy about putting an effective lid on property taxes, and we've seen how complicated that can be. So this plan this evening, in my view, Mr. President, has a great deal of merit. And certainly, its approval this evening would not be the end of this debate. And in fact, if this bill were to get to the governor's desk and he signs it, that wouldn't be the end of implementation. Because we know when flaws and glitches would become apparent throughout the implementation of a program like this, as surely they will, nothing prevents us from going back and fixing them. And there's plenty of bills, plenty of issues that we can look to, major pieces of legislation that have been voted into law and that subsequently required tweaking with follow-up bills, as I expect could potentially be the case in this case. I will say also, Mr. President, there are advantages to this bill that go beyond just the financial. Consider the constant concern from school officials about unfunded and underfunded mandates. Mandates are easy to impose because it's largely left to local officials to figure out how to pay for them. Once in place, they're extremely difficult to uproot, which is why much is said and little accomplished in the way of mandate relief. However, you start substituting state taxes for local property taxes in funding education, and chances are legislators are going to be much more careful about passing new mandates and more eager to explore opportunities to rescind costly old ones that have outlived their usefulness. You know, we've all sought office, Mr. President, motivated by the desire to do important things and big things. All of us have pledged to pursue reform. Most of us are frustrated when it seems as if we're merely tinkering around the edges of the system. This bill this evening transforms how we pay for education. Pennsylvania, if we did this, would take a far-reaching step that no other state has been able to manage. And we would turn around the perception that state officials do not listen to taxpayer concerns and do not act on their expressed priorities. Those considerations this evening make this a big and important bill, Mr. President, and I'm grateful for the chance to support it. Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Further, on the amendment, the gentleman from Johnstown, Senator Wozniak.
Thank you, Mr. President. In 1968, the Constitution, we had about 2,700 school districts in this Commonwealth, but we had 67 school superintendents. By a stroke of a pen, we created 501 school districts and 501 superintendents. While we need to get our hands around the efficiency of our school system, I've been here not quite since 1968, but the GOP reminded my people last election how long I was here. I'm sure they'll remind them the last election how long I've been here also. But ever since I've been here, the issue of property taxes has been out there. Never in the history of this Commonwealth has it gotten as far as this amendment. Under Governor Ridge, there was a special session on education, and we discussed the issue of personal income tax, sales tax, and we had all kinds of people at the hearing come up and talk, and they were for shifting the gears from property tax to a sales tax and to an income tax, except with their particular industry. So it died with the cuts of 1,000 deaths. Let's make it very clear. By eliminating property tax, you're not eliminating taxes, you're moving them. It was brought up that in the 1830s we implemented a property tax, and perhaps back in that time in the world, your home was the most valuable thing that you had. That world doesn't exist today. I do believe in the 1830s, the 1930s, even 1960s, people didn't live to be 80, 90 years of age. What we're going to do, to make it very clear to the public out there, is that we are going to increase the personal income tax. We're going to horizontally add more sales tax and increase it vertically. When you retire in Pennsylvania, please keep this in mind, your pension is not taxed. So you might be paying that increment up front for the rest of your working career, but that gift of elimination of property tax begins relatively immediately and lasts for the rest of your life. Your biggest purchases will be probably during your working years, and as you become senior citizens, your purchasing power will decrease because your kids will be grown and you need less goods. A lot of people say that the sales tax is regressive. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania says that every child has a right to a quality education free. Free doesn't mean free to the citizens, it means free to that child. Everybody should have a little bit in the game. Originally, I was pretty questionable about this concept, but the more I started listening, trying to get my arms around it, and back to the fact that politically, whether you're a Democrat or Republicans, people stand on that pulpit election after election, I'm for getting rid of your property taxes. I'm for trying to do something. And they try to take out the other guy who says that's going to be a little difficult to do. Well, here's our chance to do it. It's going to be a significant increase on one end, but identical and an equal amount of money at the other end. So the question becomes, if you are interested in eliminating your property taxes, the answer to this is yes. If you want the status quo and say, well, this goes too far, it's too complicated, and maybe we can do something different, the answer is no. But for decades, politicians have promised, and the forked tongue of the politician out both sides of their mouths. Now's the time, and maybe this doesn't get to the end game, but maybe this moves us somewhere. I know that the present governor wanted to do some property tax reduction in his legislation. I know the Senate Democrats had some property tax reduction, even significant in their in bill form. I'm sure the other Republicans in both caucuses have done the same thing. But this is a unique quantum change in the way we look at Pennsylvania. If you have the ability to pay, then you should pay. But it should not be on the property tax, which is there whether you're making $1 million or you're a widow on a fixed income making $15,000. This is a unique opportunity, and I'm asking my colleagues to be bold, be brave, take the slings and arrows of people saying you're raising the PIT or the other taxes horizontally or vertically for the sales tax, but you are eliminating property tax. And I think this will stimulate our economy. It will certainly keep our senior citizens in their homes, and it'll make people a lot more comfortable once we vet this whole thing out. So today, in this Senate floor, let's do something unique. Let's do something we haven't done for 40 years, almost 50 years. Let's change the way we pay for the education of our most important product of Pennsylvania, and that is our children. I ask for an affirmative vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair thanks the gentleman from Johnstown. Further on the amendment, Senator from Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm not going to take a lot of time. This is people who stood up here have been very well spoken. And I don't want to repeat too much. I just say that the time has come. It's time to slay this beast. And that's what it's been, a burden, as my friend Senator Wozniak says, for well over 40 years. My district, the 41st district that I represent back home, they were making bus trips in Armstrong County down here to demonstrate on the steps of the Capitol in the 70s. It's still that much passion in the district I live in, and I don't think my district is much different than anybody else's on this floor. It does appear that the willpower doesn't exist here in the Capitol to seriously discuss this issue. We keep, we take a little bite off the apple, but we never truly get the time or the effort to digest, and if we do take something off, we never put any back-end protections. They're going to become an obstacle for the taxes ever to be raised again. We don't do that. And that's what this amendment is designed to do. The time has come to end the long statewide nightmare of school property taxes here in Pennsylvania. and it's time to stop making excuses that I've made for the last 15 years to our constituents of why the elimination of the property tax cannot occur and make this long and necessary reform happen. People back home wonder what we do down here. Obviously, we haven't had much activity since July 1, but this perpetuates it. Here's an opportunity, as others have said, this is a project, a bill that we've been worked on by Senator Argyle for at least 3 years that I know of. I've signed on to every personal property tax reduction bill there is, but this is the first one that's ever made sense. And I think voting no on this bill is going to awaken a lot of property owners, and the last time I looked, they're all voters, good voters. And they finally, I think, over the course of the last few weeks, were hopeful that we were making progress on what is not ours, but their number one issue, elimination of school property tax. I realize the issue with the construction of this amendment. It's a work in progress, but let's allow the House, let's get this to the House. Let's let the effort and work of so many people continue, keep the dialogue open. There's parts in there I don't like, especially with some of the exemptions that are been eliminated. But this is an opportunity. The time is now. And as I said, let's slay this beast once and for all. Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentleman. My feisty friend from the Lehigh Valley, Senator Boscola.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of Senator Argyle's amendment to House Bill 683. The tax shift called in this bipartisan amendment would make our school funding system more sensible, more rational, and more fair. After coming up empty-handed on property tax reform promises for decades, as was mentioned earlier, I'm encouraged that we finally seem committed to finally eliminating property taxes. Mr. President, our track record is not a good one on this issue. We keep kicking the can down the road, and taxpayers and voters are tired of hearing the same old, same old. Taxpayers probably wish they had a nickel for every time a politician vowed to eliminate property taxes. Just as reliable as the Great Pumpkin or Santa Claus, our citizens know it's election time by the same old speeches and empty promises on property tax reform. In this session, we need to get this done, and adopting this amendment is a major step in that direction. Win or lose today, for my part, I will continue fighting on this issue until we finally eliminate property taxes altogether. And I'm not a newcomer on this issue, Mr. President. I've been in this fight ever since elected in 1994. Now, I had a partial victory in 2002 when a little-known section of our Constitution allows a majority of the House and Senate to call upon the governor and force him into a special session. Back in 2002, I led the effort and actually forced Governor Schweiker into a special legislative session on property taxes. It was never done before, and it hasn't been done since. That governor at the time decided to do nothing about it, which I was disappointed in. But I'm now proud to be part of a growing coalition of members who are determined to get property tax reform done this session. So here we are today. And while I'm pleased that Governor Wolf put this issue to the forefront when he made it part of his budget presentation back in March, it was a partial reform of our property taxes, I think we should push on with our efforts to completely do away with this onerous tax. In my view, the tax relief called for in this budget is a partial step in the right direction, but the amendment is a full step in the right direction. This amendment finally drives a stake through the heart of an outdated, antiquated tax system. And you know what I love about it the most? It's driven by taxpayers and voters across this Commonwealth, not by lobbyists. I love it. That's what's driving for this reform, is the people out there, the people of this Commonwealth. This amendment will shift our local funding obligation away from the local school tax base and onto a larger, more encompassing state tax base. Larger, fairer, all-encompassing. How great is that? As seniors and others on fixed incomes have painfully seen over the years, the property tax base alone is too small. It's too small to absorb the ever-increasing school costs and sustain an adequate level of funding. The average school district only receives about a third of its operating budget from the state. And I would say some other districts only receive about 20% from the state. What happens then? 80%, 70% falls on the local tax base, which is regressive and unfair. I'd like to even point out that what's even more disturbing is you could take a home worth $180,000 in one district, and that same home, $180 in another district, $180,000, one might be paying $1,000 in school taxes, another $5,000. How fair is that system? You can't defend it anymore. When a school district only receives 70% or 80% from the local tax base, and say they only get 20% from the state or 30% from the state, that leaves the lion's share of education funding right on the backs of local homeowners, a much smaller tax base. This unfair system then prompts frequent and almost yearly drastic property tax hikes. Akin to getting blood from a stone, there is only so much revenue in these communities, with a shrinking tax base and dwindling revenue streams. Seniors on fixed incomes cannot continue to keep up with ever-escalating property taxes. Young working families with children cannot hope to get their first home under a system that unfairly taxes property value over one's ability to pay. Pennsylvania's real estate market cannot hope to emerge from a recession until we remove this disincentive to owning a home. Now, Mr. President, while I do commend the governor, House Republicans, and my Senate Democratic colleagues for their partial solution, and there's nothing wrong with partial solutions, but here today we have a chance to vote on a comprehensive, all-encompassing solution. That takes courage. It's bold, and it's something that I'd like to see come out of this body today, because, you know, we tinker around the edges all the time ever since I've been here. Let's raise this tax a little bit and that a little. We never do anything bold. We never do anything that the taxpayers will stand up there and go, you know what, Senate, you did the right thing tonight. It does take courage. We have tonight to show the voters out there that we are bold and have that courage. Now, over the years, I have sought temporary solutions to this antiquated tax system, I admit. I even have a senior citizen tax freeze bill that I've been pushing ever since elected. Unfortunately, all these halfway solutions are predicated on dealing with symptoms while seeking a cure. Mr. President, this amendment tonight totally eliminates property taxes. This amendment is the cure. Thank you.
Chair, thanks, my friend from the Lehigh Valley. Further, from the great county of York, Senator Wagner.
Good evening, Mr. President. I rise also to support Senator Argle's amendment to House Bill 683. Since I arrived in the Senate a year and a half ago, I've had routine visits at my district office, my Harrisburg office, lots of emails and phone calls about eliminating property taxes, school taxes in Pennsylvania. Tonight, this amendment would help us reach the ultimate goal of eliminating school taxes. This is not property tax relief, and this is not property tax reduction. This is property tax, school tax elimination. To be clear, for listeners out there, you have three taxes. You have local county taxes, and you have municipal local taxes, and then you have school taxes. Local, county, and municipal taxes would remain in place. The elimination of school taxes would apply to all real estate in Pennsylvania, residential, commercial, and industrial. To completely eliminate school taxes on real estate in PA, the legislature has to find between $12 and $14 billion of revenue from other sources. And other sources mean new taxes, increased taxes, and lifting exemptions or goods or services not currently taxed. And it's important that I offer caution to people out there that are listening. There's no free lunch by doing this. Money is not falling out of the sky. So everyone has to have realistic expectations. I've been a private sector business owner for over 35 years, and I learned over 20 years ago a bit of wisdom from a business associate, and he said, begin with the end result in mind. So this is how we begin the task of eliminating school taxes on real estate. We have to identify the actual dollar amount that is needed to cover the school tax elimination. That's the easy part. Now here's the hard part of property tax elimination. We currently have 500 school districts in Pennsylvania. Each school district has a school board. To be clear, there are 500 different school boards that are comprised of volunteer board members. Each school district negotiates teacher contracts for wages and benefits without any input from the legislature. Currently, there are many school districts throughout Pennsylvania renewing teacher contracts with annual salary increases of anywhere from 2 to 3.5%. And these increases are being given in a period when the CPI index is less than 1%. The private sector business world is seeing dramatic health insurance increases. In the private sector, it is customary for employees to pay between 20 and 30% of their monthly health insurance costs. In the Philadelphia School District, teachers pay zero towards their health insurance costs. Many teachers throughout Pennsylvania pay a lower percentage towards their monthly insurance costs than private sector workers. We also still have not fixed the pension crisis in Pennsylvania. Prevailing wage mandates are required for construction and maintenance projects at school districts. In my own school district in York, this past summer, the school district replaced roofs on several buildings. The school finance director requested 2 bids to replace the roofs. The first bid required using prevailing wage labor, and the second bid did not require using prevailing wage labor. The prevailing wage labor price was $2.8 million. The non-prevailing wage price was $2.2 million, a difference of $600,000. The district had no choice but to award the contract using mandated prevailing wage labor. I call school districts the hungry monster that needs to be put on a diet. Until we solve salary and health insurance increases, completely eliminating school taxes without controlling teachers' salaries, health insurance, and pensions costs, this initiative would be a disaster. We must get these costs under control. Another very large issue with school boards is that I estimate between 25 and 50% of volunteer school board members are married to a teacher, have a son or daughter who are teachers. The board member may be a teacher at another school, or the board member may have been a former teacher. My point is that there is a very large amount of conflict on school boards. These conflicts must be resolved and eliminated. The conflict of interest that I just talked about on school boards is similar to the fox guarding the chicken coop. So here's the dilemma I face when voting for this amendment in HB 63. Have we started an initiative to get these spiraling costs contained or eliminated, and where is the replacement revenue coming from? Here's another bit of wisdom I heard over 20 years ago. Align your expectations with reality. In reality, eliminating school taxes is clearly a front burner issue for everyone. It must be done correctly, or 3 years from now, what was a good intention will explode. That leads me to my closing comment. I'm a person that'll tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear, and I tell my constituents this all the time. School tax elimination must be done with great thought, planning, and precision. And I believe my colleagues in the Senate are committed to getting this issue to the finish line. I intend to vote on the amendment and HB 683, but it's important it be done properly. This is a great opportunity to get the ball out on the field so we can solve the school tax crisis properly. Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentleman from York. Further, my friend from Cumberland, Senator Vance.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I think I'm going to say, and now we're going to hear the rest of the story. Sometimes when things sound good, they may be too good to be true. We do know that this will entail an increase in both sales and personal income tax from 3.07 to 4.95%, as well as sales tax. It's going to broaden it greatly. We really have managed to do it from the cradle to the grave. We are having clothing on footwear, religious publications, caskets, daycare, many, many other things, textbooks, flags. But that's not the point. Many people seem to believe that their property taxes will disappear entirely, go forever. Not true. If you look at the legislation, you will see that if any bonded indebtedness in the school districts is available, then the property taxes will remain to some degree. Right now, out of the 500 school districts, 412 have bonded debt. I asked my own school district, when does your bonded debt go away? 2035. I then said, can you refinance this bonded debt? It appears there's nothing in the legislation to cover that, so there is also nothing to prevent from rebonding the debt. Another thing, we have people who own vacation homes in our Commonwealth. They have a vacation home, but they live out of state. They will be freed from property taxes. Maybe they'll pay a small portion of sales tax, but who will pick up that burden? I think we need to look at that. There is also commercial properties that really concerns me. I don't mean to pick out casinos, but let's just say that the people who own the casinos will be rid of property tax. Is it really fair? Is it possible? I know that people are enthusiastic, and I understand why they're enthusiastic. But I think we have to step back and see the money that would be raised for elimination of the property taxes, the funds that are available will last for 3 years. Then what happens? Do we increase the personal income tax again? Do we increase the sales tax again? The thing that really bothers me most of all is that we're taking any control away from our local schools. The money will be distributed at a state level. I'm not real crazy about that. In addition to that, the hold harmless clause will be there, which means that every school district will get what they got the year before. What does this do to growing school districts? They are put in a very, very difficult position, and one does not know how they would make that up. If, in fact, school districts would be forced to go to referendum if they increase spending at all, I would like to mention that the projected money from PSERS earnings this year was supposed to be 7.5%. They now actually think it will be 3.2%. Is it fair to go back to the school districts for a failure of our state pension system, nothing that they have done, and say, well, I'm sorry, you have to come up with this, and you'll have to go to referendum again? I just think we need to step back and take a very strong look at what we're doing here. And I personally will be voting no. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Chair thanks Senator Vance. Senator Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, would the maker of the amendment please stand for a brief interrogation?
Senator Tomlinson asks if the maker of the amendment, Senator Argyle, will agree to stand for interrogation. Senator Argyle. You agree to stand for interrogation?
Yes.
The gentleman will agree to be interrogated. Senator Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, not that we could ever imagine this happening, but just in our wildest imagination, is there any provision in this bill that would fund our schools in case we might not be able to pass a state budget? Now, I know that that's a hard thing to get our arms around, but we're probably looking at the 5th or 6th month now of not having a state budget, and I didn't know, now that we do rely on local tax revenues, now that we do have school districts that do pay probably 80%, almost 90% of their funding, they're able to get through a budget problem, they're able to get through a disagreement between the governor and the legislature. Is there a provision in this bill, since all the money now is going to come into Harrisburg, is there a provision in this bill to fund these schools for 4, 5, 6, 7 months?
Thank you, Senator Tomlinson. Senator Argle.
Mr. President, there is not, nor is there under the existing law. For those of my friends in the Senate who seem to be so enamored of the status quo, I might note that on this point we did not change anything at all.
Thank you, Senator Argle. Senator Tomlinson.
On the bill, please. Thank you, Mr. President. Under current law, most school districts have the ability to raise money at the local level with a property tax, and I understand this property tax is a very difficult subject, and I actually commend my colleagues for trying to address this. I tried to address this back in 02, 01, 96, worked with actually Senator Rhodes, tried to homestead this provision so that businesses didn't get the big break, tried to make sure that senior citizens had their property taxes frozen, used the PIT because senior citizens don't pay the personal income tax. So I know all the problems that we have, but it just seems to me now that we're going to take all the tax-raising ability, most of it anyway, away from the local school district. My school district has been able to have the kids go to school because they're raising local money. I mean, if you take all that ability away from the local school, that local school has to close. They can't pay salaries, they can't pay any of their bills. So I just thought maybe we would consider that, because we're right in the middle of the budget impasse that's approaching 6 months. So I would thought that we might think a little bit about how we're going to keep our schools open when we choose up here not to fund them. That's not the fault of the local school board, it's not the fault of the parents, it's not the fault of the local taxpayer, but it's our fault. So that I would suggest that as we move on, we might think about how we would emergency fund these schools if we're going to take away their ability. And it brings up one other point that I'd really like to address that Senator Vance addressed. And I have a casino in my district that pays $7 million in property taxes right now. And before they were a casino, they paid $1 million. And I thought that's great. Now we give them a casino, they pay $7 million. That's a great increase for my people, and it shares the burden for the local homeowner. At 50% of that community's tax base is commercial and industrial. Gives my homeowners a great break. But there's no homestead provision in this bill. Who's going to make up the difference for my casino? I mean, my casino, they're going to be mad. If I vote against this, they're going to be mad because I'm not going to give that casino a $7 million break. But if I'm a homeowner in that community, I'd be pretty upset with me because I'm going to have to make up that money through all these other taxes. There's a list of taxes here that I don't think they missed anything. So you're going to ask me to give my commercial industrial properties, who haven't asked for a tax break, by the way, I'm going to give them a break on the backs of my homeowners and my residents. And I just think that's unfair. I think that's a burden that we should not place on my local taxpayer. I mean, it's incredible to me that we did not do a homestead provision. It's incredible to me that we are now including an unbelievable $13 billion tax increase and shifting that burden onto residents, buyers, people that purchase things, income taxes, and yet these commercial properties, of course the casinos do pay a 54% tax now, but still you're putting that on the everyday citizen. I can't believe the burden, and there's a lot of rural areas. This is going to be a tax increase. This is not going to be a tax shift. It's not going to be a tax decrease. It's going to be a tax increase in many of our small communities around Pennsylvania. I know this is a hard problem, and I've worked hard on it myself, and I applaud my colleagues for trying to solve it. But, you know, if this was easy and we could have solved it, we would have done this years ago. It's very, very difficult to balance this against the homeowner, against the person who purchases goods, against the person who earns a personal income tax. This is very, very hard. But what we've done here today is we've shifted away in my district, and we should vote our districts. We've shifted away in my district from individuals, or from to individuals from large commercial enterprises. And I think that's not a good thing to do, and I reluctantly think that I'm going to have to vote against this because in the past I championed doing property tax reform, a real fair property tax reform for individual citizens. But this is just too big a giveaway for the bigger corporations, and particularly for a casino that's in my district. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Chair thanks the gentleman from Bucks. The gentleman from the great county of Chester.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, as we approach today, I remember a lady who called me when I was county commissioner. She called, and during the call, I heard all this noise in the background, and I asked her, "Where are you at?" She said, "I'm calling you from a phone booth because I had to end my phone service. It's one of my ways to pay the property tax." Now, in my judgment, no one should be kicked out of their homes. No one should have to end their phone service. No one should sit there on cold nights because they're afraid to turn the electricity up for the heat, if they have electric heat, all because they have to pay the school tax. You know, and all of us, I think every single member of this body has promised and told their constituents when they ran for election, we want to have property tax reform. We want to end the school property tax. Well, now's the time to keep the promise. Well, now's the time to walk the talk. Because I have heard, I look at the elections that I'm familiar with, whether it's the House or the Senate in my area, and they all say the same thing each election. Just trust me, I'm going to make sure that we end the property tax. But we never do. Because there's always an excuse. There's always that so-and-so will be heard, or this will be done, or that will be done. Well, maybe says Senator Wagner never thought I'd be agreeing with my friend from York County, but as my friend from York County, excuse me for using the name, but as my friend from York County has explained, it is a shift of the tax burden. It's the same of money, but who is paying now is a variety of people. Because you see, we sit here and we say we haven't raised your taxes. But the truth is, we have year after year, and we've raised it on the same people. Because we sit here and say we haven't raised it, and every school board raises their taxes, and it's the same people year after year who have their taxes raised. This simply spreads that burden so that a variety of people will now have to pay this tax. You know, the American dream has always been the family home. And if there's, and that's in every aspect of our country, is always that someone can have a home and a piece of land. And what has happened in this Commonwealth is the property tax has destroyed that dream for senior citizens and for young families. And you know it, and I know it. We can sit here, we can make faces, we can deny it, but it's true. And you have heard the same stories that I have heard. And you know, in southeast Pennsylvania, what we have found ourselves doing is, yes, we're paying 80 and 90% on property tax because the state only gives us 10 or 12% back. Well, this is a chance for us to get our share as well. And you know, and if we really want to deal with any loss to business, we have the ability to do that. We can pass a Delaware loophole and get $350 million from corporations. We could pass a Marcellus shale tax if we wanted to and get money for the schools. We could support the idea well presented by the senator from Cambria County to consolidate the back office functions of our school. We have chosen not to do it. There are ways that we can make up for this, for any loss that we would sustain in terms of corporations. Also remember, it's business that has to impose these sales taxes, and that might be a potential loss for them in that frame. finally, Mr. President, what fascinates me is the unusual coalition that has formed on this matter. You know, the majority chair of education stands up, and I stand with him. And we stand up to tell you that the property tax can no longer support the schools of this Commonwealth. That if you want excellence in education, if you want equity in education across this Commonwealth, the property tax cannot achieve it for us. And we got to change the taxing system so that our schools have, all of our schools have an opportunity to teach every single of our students, every one of our students, excuse me, to the top of the curriculum. But the fascinating part, the reason why I think those of us who would call ourselves conservatives in this body, and those of us who might call ourselves progressives or middle of the road, the reason we stand today together is because we have all heard the plea of our citizens. We've all seen and met with those senior citizens who are losing their homes. We've all heard from the young couples who cannot purchase a home, who cannot have part of the American dream because on top of the payment for the home, they can't afford the property tax which would go into the mortgage itself. So there are interests that don't want any change. Of course there are interests, because remember what Martin Luther King always said, those who have power seldom give up the power willingly, and those who are benefiting from the current taxing system are not going to stand up and say, let's change. They're going to fight it as interest groups. And what we're saying is, it's about time to speak for the people of this Commonwealth. It's about time to spread the responsibility of educating each child, and we know that we cannot achieve an educational system of excellence until we get rid of the property tax and have a better system to fund our schools. Times have changed. And just as every institution in our society needs to change with changing time, so do we need to change the property tax. You know and I know that the property tax was a fair evaluation of wealth in the 19th century, and maybe even in the early 20th century, but it is no longer a fair and equitable evaluation of what someone is worth, and yet we continue to use that to determine and to fund our schools. There are moments in history, Mr. President, and this is such a moment. There are moments for change. There are moments when, despite what leaders who lead us say, and those who oppose this might say, there are moments in time where we listen to the people. The people have spoken, and in a democratic society, in a just society, in a free society, then it's our responsibility to listen to the people and to respond. And that's exactly what the coalition who is for ending the property tax, that's what where we're talking from and what we're talking about. Come on. It's about time to do something. We have the chance. Oh, there are problems with this bill. There are problems with any bill. We have a chance to figure out how we're going to help the schools that in case of a crisis like we have now without funding. But the fundamental question to end this is this. Did you promise your constituents when you ran for office that you would end the property tax? If you made that promise, then now is the time to keep that promise. Now is the time to walk the talk. Now is the time to listen to our constituents and end this antiquated system. Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair thanks the gentleman from Chester County. The gentleman from Monroe, Senator Scavello.
Thank you, Mr. President. First I want to commend Senator Argyle for his work on the amendment to House Bill 683. First, and his apology to the homeowners out there, because I think we failed them. I agree with him, not only to the homeowners, but to the homeowners, especially to the homeowners in the growing districts in the Commonwealth. Because since a lousy law was put into effect in 1991, holding holding the census at that 1990 level and still funding schools at a 1990 level, if you've grown over these years, you've taken a huge hit. If your population went in the opposite direction, you did very well. You know, I knocked on 10,000 doors this past year, and as I approached the door, 95% of those doors mentioned Senate Bill and House Bill 76. The seniors especially, and I'm going to share a story. I'm going to just give you her first name. It's Mabel. She's 88 years old. Her and her husband retired approximately 25 years ago. When she retired, they were debt-free. Her property taxes were less than $1,000. Today, her property taxes are knocking on the door of $6,500, $6,600. She lost her husband about 5 years ago and took a $5,000 hit on her income. And she's telling me at age 88, I'm making the difficult decision of medicine, food, or paying my taxes. So what does Mabel do? She cuts her pills in half. She cuts her meals. Why? Because of what we put on her. And she says, I'm guilty of one thing, living too long. There's a lot of Mabels in this Commonwealth with the same problem. Now, I've heard some things about businesses are getting a break, a 100% break, casinos and businesses. Well, I need the members that made those comments, please look at the bill. There's a tremendous amount of service taxes they're going to be paying that's going to offset some of that $7 million at that casino or any other business. There's service taxes there that the casinos and the business are going to have to pay. So they will get some break, but they're not going to get this free meal there. But I will also tell you that many of them, especially the ones that have a business that's tired, will be able to take some dollars and reinvest in their properties. And when they do that, they create jobs. And if they're successful, they'll create more jobs. I ask the members to really think about your vote here, because this is a defining moment in the Commonwealth. This is an opportunity to get rid of school property taxes to everyone. And every year, I know folks shaking, absolutely shaking, knowing what that bill is going to be, and I see them regularly. I can tell you about a county which I live in where the mortgage payment per month is less than the property taxes. And that's something that this legislature created with that hold harmless bill. I urge the members, please think about your vote and put an affirmative vote to the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair thanks the gentleman from Monroe. Further on the amendment, the senator from Philadelphia, Senator Tartaglione.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was not planning to speak, but under this bill, in Philadelphia, our sales tax will now be 9.25%. That's high. The list has been expanded to include food, clothing, personal hygiene products, diapers, textbooks, daycare. How can I ask my people in Philadelphia to pay a 9.25% interest and not be able to have a raise in minimum wage? You can't tax them up that high and not give them a raise. So please, think about that. A minimum wage has to be raised, especially if the sales tax is going to be more, expanded more. Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair thanks the gentlelady from Philadelphia. Further, the gentleman from Blair, Senator Eichelberger.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a very interesting, very complex problem that we're facing with the taxation of funding our public schools. And there's been a lot said tonight that's been very important to try to understand this bill and the purposes for it. There's a lot of good public policy measures here that are in play, and we've discussed some of them. And the shift of taxes is the primary concern that we're focused on, and that's a decision that everyone will have to make based on that. Some can argue that it's better to pay sales and income. Some can say that it's better to and have that reduction in property. Some will say that it's better to let that situation stand. I think most people think that that situation is not necessarily fair today because the assessed values all across our Commonwealth are much different, been done at many different times, are looked at even on one block in a community differently from home to home or business to business. In fact, I can remember stories vividly in Altoona, Pennsylvania, where residents that I would speak with about property taxes would tell me that they wouldn't fix up the exterior of their home because they knew their taxes would go up. So they'll fix up the inside. They'll put a home theater in. They'll do all sorts of things to the inside because the tax man doesn't look at the inside of the home. They look at the outside. That is a regressive tax. That is the quintessential definition of a regressive tax. We talk about sales tax being regressive for different reasons, but when you have a tax that penalizes people that take better care of their properties and invest in their properties and reward people that allow their properties to deteriorate and not spend money on their properties, that is a regressive tax. It also pulls down the whole neighborhood when you have properties within your community that are not being cared for and kept up to date. We have a lot of concern from our constituents about property taxes, and 70% of the property taxes in Pennsylvania are school property taxes. I don't get complaints about county taxes or municipal taxes. They're generally very low in comparison to what the schools charge. And we're faced with opposition from special interests, and they combine on this particular point to try to fight any changes to the system. What we have in our public schools today is a monopolistic bureaucracy that is opposed to any changes to what their current system is for their taxes, their revenue, how they do business, how they operate. So a key element to this that I haven't heard discussed tonight is accountability. Putting controls on what our local school boards can do to raise revenue is something that people are screaming for all across our Commonwealth. They don't like to see taxes go up on an almost annual basis, and in some areas it is annual. In fact, schools consider it a victory if they don't go above their Act 1 allowance for their tax increases. They say, well, we didn't go above the Act 1 limit this year. Well, that's nice, but they still raise taxes. I don't see headlines in the paper saying that counties or local municipalities didn't go above a couple percent. If they raise taxes, it's a headline in the paper. Somebody's raising taxes. But when schools do it, they raise them so regularly that when it's below the Act 1 allowance, it seems to be a break for the people that live within that school district. And actually, what we've heard from schools this year is that the state isn't contributing enough on a ratio basis compared to other states around the country on what we give them. They say that we don't give them enough. And I always say, well, we can do that. We can shift how the funding works, and we can take away your ability to charge taxes against property in your community, and we'll fund it from Harrisburg. And they don't know what to do with that answer. Well, now we do. I do see what they do with that answer. They don't like that answer. They want the ability to continue to raise taxes back home under any circumstances. And to bring up a point that was made earlier, even when we had stimulus money, $2 billion worth of stimulus money come from the Barack Obama administration, our schools, the majority of districts in this Commonwealth, continue to raise taxes back home. So we don't see that there's a need for these tax increases always. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. But the beauty of this new system would be that they can make that case in their own communities. If they say we have a need to raise taxes and we have a project or we have programs or we have special concerns that we need to address, they can make that case to the voters in their district, and they can decide as a community what they want to do. It won't be any longer the very isolated members of the school board with whatever conflicts of interest exist for them making that decision and imposing that on the people in their district at will on a regular basis. So I would ask my colleagues to remember the accountability measures that are in this, just by the nature of how this is constructed, that this is a very healthy thing for people as we look at pensions, as we look at other municipal controls that we've worked on in this chamber over the past several years. This is another accountability measure, but it's for schools. And we need to have more accountability with how our schools spend money. So I'd ask for an affirmative vote on this amendment and thank the sponsor for his very dedicated work to this important issue. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senators. The chair thanks Senator Eichelberger. Further on the amendment, Senator Udechak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Gentleman from Schuylkill County started the debate tonight by quoting King Solomon. While I cannot quote chapter and verse of the scripture, I am singing from the same hymnal this evening with the gentleman from Schuylkill County. I want to applaud the gentleman, I want to applaud the gentlelady from Berks County, the primary forces behind the push to eliminate school property taxes in Pennsylvania. It is a very important debate, a necessary debate, on a subject not only that I believe includes education, but I also believe includes the economy of Pennsylvania. If you're going to have a 21st century economy, if you're going to have 21st century jobs, you need a 21st century educational system, and you can't have it. You can't have a 21st century educational system if you have an archaic 19th century tax model funding that system. For far too long, many children in Pennsylvania, because of where they live, because of their zip code, were denied a fair and adequate education. Because of the tax model that we provide them to raise taxes for those schools is inadequate. So tonight, I ask for an affirmative vote on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Schuylkill County. It is an imperfect amendment. It is unfinished work. But we must start in building that 21st century public educational system tonight by advancing this amendment and advancing the elimination of school property taxes in Pennsylvania. Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Further on the amendment, Senator Costa.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, let me begin by stating that I, too, as my colleague from Luzerne County, applauding the men and women of this chamber who have stood up and expressed their desire to see changes that relate to how we deal with the property tax issue here in this Commonwealth. And I applaud them, and I appreciate and understand and feel many times the frustration in their voices and the experiences they deal with their constituents back in their respective districts. Mr. President, the amendment that's been offered today, known as Senate Bill 76, in the form of an amendment to this piece of legislation, I think, quoting the words of my colleague from Luzerne County, is imperfect. And in our view, it's something that does not, in my view, this is something that does not warrant at this time an affirmative vote. As such, I am asking my colleagues and all of my colleagues in this chamber for a negative vote. I'd really like to touch upon some of the comments made by our colleagues from Cumberland and Bucks County, specifically the issues that were raised with regard to, for example, the fact that the property taxes will not be eliminated here in Pennsylvania, and that we have in excess of $25 billion of property taxes that will continue to be exposed, and that the residents of this Commonwealth throughout our 412 school districts, as were mentioned earlier by, I believe, the gentleman from your county, that continue, or the gentlelady from Cumberland County, that have 412 school districts that have current debt that must be paid down. So to suggest the property tax is going away, I think is not appropriate. The fact of the matter is 412 school districts will continue to receive property tax bills. And depending upon the level and the amount of the debt for that particular school district will determine what your property taxes will be, even if Senate Bill 76 in this form would make its way to the governor's desk and passed. Second point I wanted to raise, I think was also raised by the gentlelady and the gentleman I referenced earlier, relates specifically to the shifting. The shifting of the in excess of some say closer to $4 billion in commercial property taxes that are currently paid by our business entities across this Commonwealth. We would be relieving them of that burden, as was illustrated by the gentleman from Bucks County, from that obligation. And there are a number of businesses across this Commonwealth who today pay a property tax. I have the privilege of representing a large part of the city of Pittsburgh, and as I look downtown, I see these tremendous commercial buildings, 50 and 60 stories high, who would be relieved of their property taxes, and that amount of property taxes that they may not be paying will be thrust upon the people of the Commonwealth. All over the Commonwealth, people are paying more, and a 62% increase in PIT and 1% increase in the sales tax, as well as extensive broadening of the sales tax exemption itself. I agree with the gentleman from Bucks and a gentlelady from Cumberland when they spoke and said that it's not fair that these across the board, these entities would be relieved of their obligation to pay any property taxes into our school districts. I think that that burden should continue there, and that we have to have a conversation about how we address that. Two other points, and I will end my remarks. With respect to the current legislation, it seems to be overly burdened with legislation that deals with a lot of exemptions that relate to business. And I can appreciate the business-to-business nature of wanting to help protect them, but at the end of the day, what we're saying is that business-to-business activity that will be subject to the sales tax for every one of these taxpayers we're worried about would not be paid by that business. So they're getting another exemption. In fact, they're going to get 13 exemptions from the ability to have to pay the sales tax on the relationship that they have with their entities. I believe that that's inappropriate and it goes too far. And the final piece, Mr. President, I know a lot of us have talked to a lot of our families, middle-class families in Pennsylvania, who pay their federal taxes and pay their state taxes and are very disturbed by some of that. But this amendment would provide for an elimination of a pretty extensive and pretty important federal tax deduction when folks who itemize their taxes. It eliminates the federal tax deduction, as I understand it, which is a significant deduction, particularly for middle-income families who do itemize when they purchase their home. For a variety of these reasons, I asked my colleagues for a negative vote, but I would be remiss if I didn't say we understand, at least I understand, the frustration that homeowners experience every day with respect to paying their property taxes. And we are mindful of that. We have to find a way to find another solution to be able to do that. This may not, in my view, this is not the solution to try to address that. And as was stated earlier, we need to take a look at some other alternatives that have been out there that address these type of issues that relate to not making sure that we have to deal with the debt, and let's making sure that the business community across Pennsylvania does not get a $3 billion tax deduction on the backs of every single working man and woman in this Commonwealth. That's what we need to be able to do. I'm asking for a negative vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair thanks the gentleman from Allegheny. Further on the amendment, Senator Argyle for the second time.
Mr. President, I want to thank the 84 local taxpayer groups, the Coalition of Pennsylvania Taxpayer Associations, our Senate co-sponsors, Representative Jim Cox and his co-sponsors on House Bill 76, for all their efforts. I can tell you that since the day that David Baldinger and Jim Cox came to see me, my life has never been the same since they asked me to introduce this bill for the first time in the Senate in trying to end this status quo. Throughout this long debate tonight, I hope you were listening, not one speaker defended the school district property tax. Perhaps that's because this system is truly indefensible. We heard a lot tonight about how things have changed since the 1830s. In our own families, primarily today, the language is English in our homes. That wasn't the case back in the 1800s. 6 years ago, I stood right there. My wife was holding my great-grandfather Rohrbach's family Bible. My mom and dad were with us. My daughter was there. And if you would look in that 1871 family Bible, in that third chapter of Ecclesiastes, it says, Alles hat seine Zeit. Alles hat seine Zeit. Everything has its time. Ladies and gentlemen, today is the time to repeal and replace this hated and unfair tax. I hear that maybe this bill somehow isn't good enough. I didn't hear anyone defending the status quo, but for too long, we haven't had a choice. Tonight, we have a choice. I hear that maybe it doesn't get everybody that 100% property tax right away, But if you go back to your districts and you ask your constituents, how about an 80% cut? How about a 90% cut? How about a 95% cut that, yes, will eventually turn into a 100% cut? You mentioned the fact that they will never, ever, ever be subject to another increase by their local school board in the property tax. Representative Scavello keeps whispering in my ear that we will still allow them to have the earned income tax. They will have other options, but we're taking away that property tax that so many of us have heard complaints about. I think after 181 years, this repeal effort is long overdue, and I'm asking for your support tonight.
The chair thanks the gentleman. We now will return to leaves. Senator Corman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, can I move Senator Scarnati from personal leave to legislative leave?
Senator Corman asks that he requests that Senator Scarnati be moved from personal to legislative leave. Without objection, that leave is granted. Clerk will call the roll.
Alloway. Argel. Aye. Almond. Aye. Baker. Aye. Bartolotta. Blake. No. Boscola. Aye. Brewster. Aye. Brooks. No. Brown. Aye. Corman. No. Costa. No. Dinneman. Aye. Eichelberger. Aye. Farnese. No. Falmer. Aye. Gordner. No. Greenleaf. No. Haywood. No. Hughes. No. Hutchinson. No. Kitchen. No. Leach. No. McGarrigle. No. McElhenney. No. Mensch. Aye. Pileggi. No. Rafferty. Aye. Sabatina. No. Scarnati. Aye. Scavello. Aye. Schwank. Aye. Smucker. Aye. Stefano. Aye. Tartaglione. No. Teplitz. No. Tomlinson. No. Vance. No. Vogel. Volakovich. Aye. Wagner. Aye. Ward. No. White. Aye. Wiley. No. Williams. No. Wozniak. Aye. Yaw. No. Udicek. Aye. Alloway. Bartolotta. Aye. Bogle. Alloway. Aye. Bogle. Aye.
The vote on the amendment is ayes 24, nays 24. The chair exercises the prerogative to break the tie and votes negative. The amendment fails.